The first thing I noticed was how the chandelier trembled, not from music or applause, but from something unseen, like the room itself had sensed trouble before any of us did. And I remember thinking that places like this always know when blood is about to be spilled. If you enjoy stories where ordinary lives collide with dangerous power, where one moment changes everything, go ahead and like and subscribe now. You'll want to stay for what unfolds next. The dinner was supposed to be elegant, forgettable, one of those charity galas designed to make wealthy people feel generous for a few hours before returning to their guarded lives. And that's exactly why she blended into the background so easily at first. A single mother named Mara Bellucci, seated alone at a round table meant for 8, wearing a modest black dress she'd bought on clearance. Hands folded around a water glass because wine made her think too much, watching couples lean toward each other in practiced intimacy while she checked her phone every few minutes for updates from the babysitter. I could tell, even from across the room, that she didn't belong here. Not because she lacked grace, but because she carried the quiet exhaustion of someone who had learned to survive without help, the kind that shows in the shoulders before it ever reaches the face. The ballroom itself was a study in excess. Marble floors polished to a mirror shine, gold-trimmed columns, servers gliding like ghosts between tables. And at the center of it all, the man everyone pretended not to watch, Adriano Villani, whose presence bent the air the way gravity bends light. People said he was a philanthropist, a shipping magnate, a patron of the arts. People who knew better said his name in lower voices. And I had learned long ago that when powerful men attend charity dinners, it's rarely for charity. Mara didn't know his name yet, but danger has a way of introducing itself without formalities. And as the evening dragged on, I noticed the way her discomfort sharpened into something closer to fear, not the vague anxiety of social awkwardness, but the alert stillness of prey sensing movement in tall grass. 2 men had positioned themselves near the bar, close enough to watch her table without making it obvious. Their suits expensive but ill-fitted, eyes too focused, hands too still, and every time Mara shifted in her chair or reached for her phone, one of them mirrored the motion like a bad reflection. She tried to ignore it at first. Single mothers become experts at dismissing unease because panic is a luxury they can't afford. But when the auction started and the lights dimmed, the room growing louder and darker all at once, I saw her decision form. She was going to leave early, donate quietly, and slip back into anonymity where nothing could touch her. She stood, chair scraping softly against marble, and that was when Adriano moved. He didn't hurry. Men like him never do. He crossed the room with the calm certainty of someone who knew exactly how much space he was allowed to take, and the crowd parted without realizing they were doing it, conversations faltering as he passed, eyes dropping instinctively. By the time Mara noticed him, he was already too close to ignore, and I watched her straighten out of reflex, the way people do when authority enters their orbit. He smiled, not warmly, but precisely, and said her name as if they were old acquaintances, and I saw the shock flash across her face before she masked it. Because there are few things more unsettling than a stranger who knows you. She opened her mouth to deny it, to ask how, to back away, but he leaned in just enough that from a distance it looked intimate, conspiratorial, and said something that made her breath catch, something that turned her confusion into calculation in the span of a heartbeat. The men by the bar shifted then, subtle but unmistakable, and Adriano didn't even glance their way. He didn't have to. He offered Mara his hand like a gentleman asking for a dance, and I could almost hear her thoughts racing. Her son, the sitter, the rent, the 1,000 small responsibilities that told her not to trust anyone, especially not a man like this. But fear has a way of simplifying choices, and in that moment, refusing him felt far more dangerous than accepting. When the music swelled, he guided her toward the dance floor with an arm at her back that was firm without being possessive. And as they moved together under the chandelier's trembling light, something shifted in the room. Whispers rippled outward. Heads turned. The 2 men hesitated, their confidence faltering as I suddenly found them. And I realized then that whatever Adriano had asked of her, it wasn't kindness, it was strategy. Mara played her part with a grace born of necessity, resting her hand where he guided it, matching his steps even as tension held her body taut. And when she looked up at him, I saw anger there, and fear, and something else too. Relief, sharp, and unexpected. He spoke close to her ear, words meant only for her. And though I couldn't hear them, I recognized the cadence of reassurance layered over warning, the promise of safety with a price attached. Around them, the room exhaled, satisfied by the illusion of romance, unaware that a small war had just been postponed, not ended. When the song ended and applause followed, Adriano didn't let go right away, and neither did she, because both of them understood what had just happened. Mara Bellucci had crossed an invisible line the moment she took his hand, and whether she liked it or not, her quiet, carefully contained life had just brushed up against a world where nothing was accidental, least of all a dance. By the time the applause faded and the orchestra slipped into a softer background melody, I could feel the tension settle into a new shape, heavier and more deliberate, because moments like that don't end when the music stops. They just move to quieter quarters. Adriano finally released Mara's hand and guided her toward the edge of the ballroom, as if this were all part of the evening's natural rhythm, his palm lingering at her back a second longer than necessary, not for intimacy but for emphasis, a silent message to anyone still watching that she was no longer unattended. Up close, I could see how tightly she was holding herself together, chin lifted, shoulders squared, eyes alert in a way that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with survival. And when a server passed with a tray of champagne, she waved it away with a small, decisive shake of her head, as if accepting a drink might fracture the fragile control she'd built. Adriano leaned closer, his expression calm enough to pass for charming, and said something that made her blink hard. Once, then nod. Later she would admit he'd told her she was safe for the moment, but safe, in his vocabulary, clearly meant something temporary and conditional. The men by the bar hadn't left. They'd repositioned, drifting apart to look less obvious, and I noticed how Adriano's gaze tracked them effortlessly, like a chess player who'd already calculated the next 10 moves. He steered Mara toward a side lounge away from the main crowd, a space framed by tall curtains and low amber lighting where donors retreated to make quiet deals. And as they walked, conversation softened and then stopped altogether, people pretending to admire art or check messages while their attention clung to the pair like static. Mara's heels clicked too loudly on the marble, betraying the fact that she wanted to run, but she didn't. Instead, she followed him into the lounge and stood rather than sit when he gestured to a leather chair, folding her arms loosely as if that might keep the world at bay. "Who are you?" she finally asked, her voice steady but thin, and Adriano smiled in a way that didn't quite reach his eyes, answering with a half-truth about business and influence that told her nothing and everything at once. I watched her weigh her next words carefully, because women like Mara learn early that the wrong question can be as dangerous as the wrong answer. And when she asked why those men had been watching her, his expression sharpened, the pleasant mask slipping just enough to reveal calculation beneath. He told her she'd been noticed without meaning to be, that proximity to certain people creates ripples whether you want them or not. And I saw the anger spark then, quick and bright, because she hadn't asked to be near anyone powerful. She'd been invited here as a favor, a courtesy extended by someone who wouldn't bear the consequences. Her phone buzzed in her hand, the babysitter's name lighting up the screen, and for a split second her world narrowed to the small, ordinary panic of motherhood. Had something happened? Was her son awake and asking for her? And I saw Adriano clock that moment with interest, not irritation, as if the reminder of her real life anchored something for him. When she answered, murmuring reassurances and apologies, he turned slightly, positioning himself so the entrance to the lounge remained in his peripheral vision, a habit born of necessity. And when she hung up, his tone softened just enough to feel intentional as he asked her son's name. That did it. The wall she'd been holding cracked, just a hair, because men like Adriano weren't supposed to care about details like that, and she told him, watching closely for mockery or leverage, finding neither. Instead, he explained, plainly, finally, that the men watching her were connected to someone who believed Mara could be used to send a message, not because she mattered to them, but because she was unguarded, and unguarded people are easy currency. The words landed hard, and I saw fear take root in a new way, not sharp and immediate but cold and expansive, the kind that spreads outward to encompass everything you love. And when she asked if her son was in danger, Adriano didn't lie. He said no, not yet, and that honesty carried more weight than comfort ever could. Around them, the gala continued, laughter rising and falling like waves against glass, oblivious to the quiet negotiation unfolding in the shadows. And when Adriano told her she should leave soon, escorted, her relief was immediate and fleeting because it came paired with a warning. Leaving wouldn't end this, it would only delay it. He offered protection without calling it that, framing it instead as an alignment of interests, and I could see Mara recoil at the phrasing, pride and instinct flaring, because she'd built her life on not owing anyone anything. She told him she hadn't asked for this, that she wanted to go home and forget the entire night, and he listened, really listened, then said something that changed the temperature of the room. Forgetting was no longer an option, but choosing how to remember it was. He explained that by dancing with him, by being seen at his side, she'd already altered the narrative in a way that made her less useful to those who wanted to exploit her. But visibility is a double-edged blade, and now eyes would linger where they hadn't before. Silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable, and in it I saw Mara doing the math she'd been forced to learn. Risk versus safety, dignity versus survival, while Adriano waited, patient, because powerful men know that pressure works best when it feels self-inflicted. Finally, she asked what he wanted in return, and his answer surprised her. Nothing immediate, just permission to make sure she got home safely and the understanding that if she received any calls, messages, or visits that felt wrong, she would tell him. The simplicity of it made her suspicious, rightly so, but before she could respond, one of Adriano's men appeared at the edge of the lounge, murmuring something low and urgent that tightened Adriano's jaw. He nodded once, then turned back to Mara with an expression that had lost all pretense of charm. It was time to go. As they rose, I noticed the two men from the bar watching openly now, frustration etched into their faces as Adriano's presence recalibrated the room around him, and when he placed a guiding hand at Mara's back again, it wasn't a request, it was a shield. They moved together through the crowd toward a private exit, the gala swallowing its own secrets behind them, and as the doors closed and the noise dimmed, I understood something Mara hadn't yet articulated. This wasn't the end of her involvement in Adriano Valeni's world. It was the moment it became impossible to pretend she was still outside of it. The night finally loosened its grip on the city as they stepped outside, the cool air carrying the distant hum of traffic and the faint smell of rain. And for the first time since the chandelier had trembled overhead, Mara allowed herself to breathe like someone who had survived something without fully understanding how close it had come. Adriano's car waited at the curb, dark and understated, the kind of vehicle that blended into shadows despite its cost. And as the driver opened the door, I saw Mara hesitate, the last fragile thread of independence tugging against the reality pressing in from all sides. She glanced back at the building, at the glowing windows and the people still laughing inside, and I could tell she was already mourning the version of herself who would never again sit alone at a table believing invisibility was a form of safety. The drive was quiet, not awkward but intentional, the city sliding past in reflections of glass and steel while Adriano kept his attention outward, tracking movement, mirrors, patterns, and when Mara finally spoke, it wasn't to ask about him or the men or the future, but to say thank you in a voice that carried both gratitude and resentment, because being saved without consent is still a kind of violation. He acknowledged it with a nod rather than an apology, explaining that his world didn't allow for clean rescues, only calculated ones, and that if he'd misjudged her willingness to endure discomfort for protection, she was free to tell him to stop. She surprised them both by not doing so. Instead, she asked him to promise one thing, that whatever games were being played, her son would never become a piece on the board. And when Adriano gave his word, it wasn't dramatic or grand, just certain, and I recognized that tone as the one men like him used when a line was absolute. They arrived at her apartment building, modest and unremarkable, the kind of place no one notices until they're looking for it, and Adriano's presence there felt almost surreal, power brushing up against peeling paint and flickering hallway lights. He walked her to the door, but didn't cross the threshold, stopping short as if he understood that some boundaries, once crossed, can never be restored, and when she unlocked the door, she turned back with a question she hadn't planned to ask. whether dancing with him had really changed anything. Adriano considered it, then told her the truth. It hadn't changed who she was, but it had changed who would think twice before touching her, and sometimes that difference was the thin line between peace and chaos. He left her with a card bearing only his name and a number. No titles, no promises, just an open channel. And as his footsteps retreated down the hall, Mara stood there for a long moment before going inside, the quiet of her apartment wrapping around her like an old, familiar coat that no longer quite fit. Later, as she checked on her sleeping son and sat alone in the dark, replaying the night in fragments, the music, the weight of Adriano's hand, the eyes that had followed her, I realized this was not a story about rescue or romance in the simple sense, but about thresholds, the moment when an ordinary life brushes against extraordinary danger and cannot return unchanged. Mara would wake the next morning to school lunches and work emails in a world that looked the same on the surface, but somewhere beneath it, a new current would be moving, subtle and relentless, carrying her toward choices she hadn't yet imagined. And Adriano Valeni, for all his power and calculation, had made one mistake that night. He had underestimated the woman he'd asked to pretend, because Mara Bellucci did not survive by accident, and the world he'd pulled her into was about to learn that protection cuts both ways.